All right, we're live. Brian, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've really been looking forward to this. I've been following a lot of your recent predictions. I think people are very quickly going to take a lot of what you talked about with Lenny, for example, on his podcast, and think it's obvious now. But you've, I think, been calling the shots and been very correct about a lot of what we're seeing with distribution platform shifts. And I've been a big fan of your writing there. I've also been a big fan of what you're doing with Reforge on the courses side. I run my course on Maven, but I'm a big fan of what you're doing on the courses side in Reforge. And I wanted to start the conversation by going into maybe what people don't know as much about with what Reforge is and what you are working on right now, which is products. Reforge is not just a platform for courses anymore. And I know you've been super busy, very prolific in testing new products. So maybe we can just start with what got you, maybe excited about expanding beyond courses, and then how are you currently thinking about the problems you're most excited to solve with some of the products that you're building at Reforge?
Yeah, it's a pretty big evolution story, and I think we could probably deconstruct all the internal conversations around like product strategy, how we made like some of the decisions, kind of moved into execution, and kind of how I'm thinking about the future, not just for us, but I think pretty much every product team is in this massive moment of change, trying to figure out how to navigate these like wild waters that we're all living in. I started Reforge not to necessarily build an education company. I think from the outside, maybe that's a quick assumption. I was actually just really fascinated in how a lot of the top operators were operating, what they were learning, what they were doing. And I was really interested in how we could help a bunch of other teams, product teams, growth teams, operate in the same way. Now that spark took the formation of a course initially, and I had a lot of product market fit right out of the gate. It grew incredibly fast for a number of years, and we had a lot of customer requests over the year. I'm sure you probably get in your own course, which is like, cool, great course. Now, can you do this for me or help me do this? Like, help me implement it, right? Like, there's this gap. There's always this gap between the learning side of things and the execution side of things. And that gap haunted me for the first, call it 7-8 years of the Reforge business, because it felt like despite an immense amount of effort, we were never going to be able to fully solve that gap. And that my initial interest just through a learning experience. I don't know, Bennett, do you get the same thing in your courses? Do you hear a lot of that?
Yeah, we just did a whole episode on my AI practice copilot, but that's exactly why I built my practice copilot,
Okay.
is because we would work through the frameworks in the course, and then I would leave people with, yeah, but practice is really what you need to be successful in these interviews. And they'd be like, cool, like, what does that mean? Like, how do I actually do that? And I'm like, well, you could do mocks, but I'll save you the whole story. If people want to hear more about this, they can go back to the episode Marc and I recently did on it. But yeah, like, I think that I built something that allows people to get more reps with the material on their own, which then gets them ready for the step where they can do live mock interviews with a human and get a lot more value out of those moments. So it doesn't surprise me that you were hearing a similar kind of gap for the things that you teach, which is like, how do I take what I learned in this course and apply it in my job? I spend a lot of time talking to Tal and Colin and Aman about this too with their courses. So I think it's a very common problem.
Yeah. And I think to do that most effectively for kind of like ongoing work topics like product strategy and growth strategy and stuff is you have to kind of be there in the moment of need, in the flow of work to do it most effectively. So anyways, a long story short, AI kind of really opened the window for that opportunity for a whole host of reasons. But the main ones were, okay, one, AI is actually a technology where you could start to integrate the actual knowledge into the tool set that people are using every day. The second thing was it was very clear that every product team, every professional was going to go through both a like tooling and technology change, which is, we could talk about from the growth perspective later. Everybody is a buyer in this market. They're in market, which is a very unique moment in time. But third, there's like a big human and behavior knowledge change that needs to go with that. And so we decided that with AI, we could have, we can back up in a second and talk about just like the product strategy kind of thinking, but we ended up with a couple different directions. We kind of chose this direction, and we very quickly wanted to land multiple products across the entire product lifecycle. We didn't know, and we still don't know exactly what product development is going to look like in the future. I think we're all still in the midst of figuring it out. But where we've taken shots are places that we think are still core to the product development process and where AI can significantly help. And so those 4 places are at the beginning of the process around discovery. So we have 2 products there: Insights, which takes all the fragmented feedback from all the different sources, uses AI to aggregate it, join it with your quantitative data, analyze it, query it, all that kind of stuff. We have Reforge Research, which is an AI interviewer. So that helps you actually go out and capture new insights from your actual customers. We have Reforge Build, which is coming out of beta very soon, which is AI prototyping, but specifically built to prototype on top of your existing product, your existing context, rather than like starting from scratch where most of the app builders have been. And then the 4th product is Reforge Launch, which helps you launch, manage, measure all of these non-deterministic experiences, which is a whole like huge change for us as well. So those are the 4 places. We might go into more. I've actually looked at a bunch more as well of it, but these are kind of the 4 products that we have. And what we're really trying to do is not just through the learning side of things, the knowledge and behavior change, but actually help put all of that stuff into practice at the core parts of product development that we think will be meaningful, sustain, even in an AI native world. And so it's been both a product change as well as a internal change. We've landed 4 huge, actually 5, we killed one, which we could talk about. 4 huge products in 9 months, which I think a few years ago, I would have told you were insane. Yeah. Yeah. It still is a little insane. Don't get me wrong.
How big is the team? Like how big is Reforge? Like you're like,
that was mostly done 80? With 25 people. Yeah. All 4 crazy. Were done across the team, about 20 to 25.
How many of the 25 are like what you'd consider like broader product team, like product design, engineering, those skill sets?
That's what I'm saying is like the product and design team was, it was basically 20 to 25. It was essentially 4 teams of like 4 to 5, something like that. I'm excluding the learning business from that, but they're pretty separated at the moment internally.
That's fascinating. It sounds like you spun up a bunch of small, very small teams, each having their own problem and their own charter and their own resources to kind of chase 0 to 1 bets in parallel with each other versus doing what I've mostly seen historically companies do, which is you maybe have 1, maybe 2 hypotheses at a time that you're going to be poking at, and then you double down where it makes sense. It sounds like you did kill 1 product, so you learned something that made you change your opinion, but 4 bets in parallel.
This was partially informed by 2 places. One is my time at HubSpot. I was on 2 missions there to help establish like product-led growth motion and to help them go multi-product. And we had to figure out this machine internally of how do we take these new bets. Also, Parker Conrad, Rippling founder, has talked a lot about this philosophy as well. And we've taken elements from both. Same thing, basically discrete problems. Every team is led by 1 or 2 former founders. We did a couple acquisitions in order to enable this. But essentially discrete product areas and problems. We didn't really encumber them with like having to match to our exact design system, infrastructure, all that type of stuff. We were just like speed, like that's what we're going to maximize for. We're now in a phase of, now that we've landed these things and validated a bunch of them, that we're now trying to bring them together in a stronger way, which is kind of phase 2. But we kind of, we landed all of those teams. And so we just had an internal conversation about this, which was, we looked back on the year and we were like, oh man, 5 products, that was a lot. It felt a lot longer than that amount of time period. And then we were like, well, our customers are asking like how we're doing this. And I think behind the question when they're asking this is like, have you all adopted AI in some magical way that I don't know about that. That's I think that's all of our anxiety is what it feels like. Is it feels like there's a set of teams out there that have adopted it in a way that I haven't yet, and that's a huge advantage. And to a certain extent, that might be true. And I don't know if we had this conversation internally and we were like, actually, we attribute more of this to the elements that it's more the people, the team structure, the discreteness, the trade-offs that we accepted, like all these foundational things. Of course, AI assisted in that and helped our development speed, but I don't think it's actually the root cause.
Yeah, I definitely want to dig into a little bit more into the team structure and how you guys are working together. But before we do that, I do want to talk about a little bit about your strategy of how you went about. Because I think there's like two interesting things about the strategy. One is like, how did you choose to get into these different steps of the product process, if you will? And then the other one is like this strategy of like just launching multiple products and deciding which products to acquire versus which ones to build internally. And I'm not sure which one do you think is more interesting to go into first, but I think those are two. Yeah.
Yeah, let's walk through the evolution. So I think let's first kind of just like state the environment we're all living in, which I think is probably the most competitive, intense, strategic environment that I've ever seen in my 20-ish plus years of operating in technology and startups. Ravi Mehta, I think, does a really good job of diving deep into this in our AI strategy program. But just to kind of like highlight the things, there's three major forces that everybody's competing with right now. One is that all of the incumbents are moving much faster with all of this technology, and they're essentially expanding all of their product portfolios to what I would say like suck up all the oxygen in the room to make sure that they're filling any cracks that they might have felt exposed to in terms of disruption. You see this all across the board. I think Atlassian, Figma, even companies so like launch it, like they're all expanding their product portfolios at an unbelievably incredible pace. And this is happening in every single category. So that's force number one. Force number two is these huge horizontal platforms that we are all competing with in some way, shape, or form, the ChatGPTs, the Claudes of the world, those types of things, because all of our habits are shifting there. I'm sure you're using these tools, 20 plus times a day. It's our new default starting point. And so if our default starting point can do something at an equal or even less, incrementally less like quality output, the average user, the consumer is always going to choose that over adopting some alternative thing. And so these tools are so powerful, moving so fast, eating up so many use cases that we're all in some way, shape, or form competing with that as well. Even our education side of the business, right? Learning and content consumption is very much like starting there. So like this is even outside of software products. The third thing that we're all competing with is that every single category, as soon as there's like a sign of success, the amount of time before other startups come in to compete is like very minimal. And this is part of, YC's pumping out 3 to 6 startups in every single category that has any sort of traction, every single cohort. And I'm talking like even small things. Like one category I looked at was AI session replay companies. And I swear like there's 2 to 3 of those every single YC cohort I've looked at for like the past 3 quarters. So, and that's a pretty narrow, software space. So these are the 3 massive forces that everybody is like competing with, and everybody is in the whole game. If you're an early stage startup or a new product, is that you somehow, if you think about all of these 3 things as like gravity that's trying to keep you down on Earth, you have to somehow hit escape velocity out of this gravitational pull and like emerge among the top. And it's just gotten a lot harder for a whole host of reasons, but that's number one. So a couple years ago,
by the way, one quick follow-up, like how would you, from your perspective, how would you rank them in terms of like most dangerous? Number 1 being the most dangerous, number 3 being the least dangerous. Because from my perspective, like as you were talking through this, I'm like, the last 2 feel like a lot more scary than the first one, given that these teams are maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, dangerous to who?
like, let's say that's a good point. Let's say I'm a founder that I'm trying to create a new company, or I'm a nascent company. Like, I feel like, okay, like I can outcompete the incumbents because we work in a different way, and it's gonna, even though like they can fill those gaps, eventually it's going to be harder for them to innovate and move as quickly as we do. OpenAI could definitely steal my lunch by launching a new launch case, or another founder can come in with newer technology, and all the work that I've done can be disrupted. So, but yeah, that's a good question. But maybe
it depends where you're standing from, 100%. And I think we wrote this blog post on like, how do you assess your risk? And it kind of goes through all of these different points, through distribution, through product, through a few other components, like your monetization model, all of these different components. But it does really depend on where you're standing from, what assets you have, and all of those pieces. I think all of them are threats on different dimensions, like different pros and cons. If you actually look at the incumbents, where they're really racing towards, where they're having the best success, is known categories. Because in the same way that, Reforge was able to spin up a bunch of 0-to-1 bets and execute really well, like AI is really good at accelerating things that are starting from a more like fresh slate, where you're a little bit more unencumbered. And so that's where you see those incumbents kind of racing into the known categories, the known solutions, and then just like leveraging their massive distribution into those places.
And what I think we're seeing is we're basically seeing, I think all of the big companies are simultaneously rolling their own bets while monitoring the market to see what the market seems to be rewarding by vis-a-vis smaller startups gaining traction. So it's almost like there's this massive experiment right now of kind of like outsourced R&D happening, where all of the startups are basically filling all the nooks and crannies in the market with AI, and then winners. Some spaces are emerging as losing spaces. Some are emerging as big enough to support multiple players. And then I suspect every company ultimately has to make the kinds of decisions that you've been having to make, Brian, whether they're small companies or big ones, which is to build or buy what they want to have in a given category. You've done a little bit of both, it sounds like. But I think every one of these things that we're calling threats and risks right now, I think you could totally just reframe as potential tailwinds that can be carrying a new startup or an incumbent into like a better place and helping them be successful. But if they don't know how to ride the tailwinds, those tailwinds could become headwinds if they don't know how to adjust. Yeah, that kind of seems like I'm curious what your take is on that.
Yeah, like I said, it depends on where you're starting from and what assets you have available to you, and then how do you leverage those assets into playing this game. The incumbents are leveraging their assets, right? Their capital, their distribution, like all of those things. And then you starting to see the horizontal players leverage their assets in different ways. ChatGPT is leveraging their massive consumer distribution. And that's like the whole app ecosystem, the SDK, the whole prediction of how we're going to go through this open closed phase. And then, the interesting thing is like we used to say like the main advantage of startups was speed. But when you look at the first two categories we just talked about, you have to really consider, well, like speed and what? Because actually the speed of the other two have actually sped up quite a bit as well. Yeah. And so like just the relative difference there has kind of really decreased. So there's bigger shots in all that.
I wonder if like the special ingredient is maybe it's almost like iteration speed, or like the number of shots you can take, or the number of swings you can take, or the amount of zigzagging you can do in a time frame. Because if I think about what a startup is better at than a big company, it's changing direction on a dime. Like you get learnings today, next week you could literally change the entire pitch as a startup and test something completely different. Bigger companies have, I don't know if they've been able to operate like startups in a sense, but having worked at a place like Facebook, like the chain of command and like the speed of decisions is just like not as like everyone's got to report to someone else, right? So unless it's like a top-down directive that we're going to stop doing this now and we're going to start doing this other thing, things take at least weeks at the fastest, if not months, and sometimes quarters to like change direction. And I don't know if like those organizational dynamics have evolved to basically become faster and tighter.
I think the incumbents have gotten much better at it just because of the urgency of it. I would say for startups, the two biggest things are, one is essentially the how forward looking your bet is. So there's this whole notion of like, you've got to build for where the models is going versus where the models are today. And so that's like one style of bet that you can take. The second style of bet that I was just thinking about is there's essentially two types of buyers in the market right now. The first buyer, and what some vendors are doing, mostly the incumbents, are trying to like meet companies and consumers where they're at today. So what this looks like in practice is a company has some workflow, some problem, and they're trying to take a piece of that workflow and use AI to do it in the exact same way that they were doing it before. The second category of folks is actually, I'm taking a step back and I'm looking at how do I do something that in a way that wasn't possible before, but is now possible with AI. And in a B2B context, that means rather than just like automating little pieces of that workflow with AI, it means basically blowing up the whole workflow and doing it totally different. Now, the problem with this second category for incumbents is when you look at that, usually the companies that are actually operating in that way are those that are like new companies, small companies that are just forming, and like they have the flexibility and all these things. They're not constrained. They can like work in all new and different ways. And so when an incumbent looks at that market, typically they're like, that's too small. It's too slow developing. It's not interesting enough for us. And there's too much opportunity cost for us to actually take like that type of bet. And so I actually think that's really good types of bets for early stage startups. So an example here is a company that I'm an investor in from former HubSpot folks called Day AI, where they're taking a truly AI native way to CRMs. So once again, there's like these two types of new AI CRM products on the market. There's ones that it's basically the same old sales CRM workflow, except there's little pieces of it that are automated or slightly improved by AI. And they've taken a true like AI native approach to the topic, but it requires companies to completely operate their sales in a different workflow. And
so it's really not compatible with like Salesforce or HubSpot, traditional
like like
which are like the hardest to rip out systems like on demand.
Exactly. So you have these two totally different types of markets right now. And so I would say if like these early stage startups are taking bets in the first market, that's dangerous. You'll probably actually get some very quick short-term traction because there's so many buyers in the market looking for AI tools, looking to automate their existing workflow. But I would say like if you show any type of progress, that's where the incumbents are going to basically plow you over. Whereas I think in the other category, that those are like types of markets and things that look too small to incumbents, or even honestly the horizontal players at this point in time that are trying to grow to $100 billion revenue to fund all of their costs. So those are like a couple. I think there's more. But that's kind of like a couple areas that I think about if I was an early stage startup.
Makes sense. I didn't mean to derail us too much, but yeah, I love to keep going through like, okay, like there's this is a very intense environment for these three forces. And then, like how do you navigate that? How do you start thinking about like kind of Reforge the strategy there?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago when we were starting to think AI was really inflecting, that was obvious. And we were starting to think through our options. So a lot of people, product strategy is like one of those amorphous topics that can be hard to execute on. The way we think about it at Reforge is essentially there's 5 types of product work. There's 0 to 1 product market fit work. There's core feature work, once you have product market fit. There's growth work, which is like optimizing activation funnels, all of that type of stuff. There's scaling work. And then there's product market fit expansion, which is like going multi-product, trying to like expand your product market fit. And product strategy is essentially where are you placing your bets among those? It's allocating bets among those 5 places, depending on where you're at as a company. And so I think pre-AI, where we were at was what a typical company would look like. Our bets were sort of spread between core feature work and some growth work primarily, like those types of 2 places. And so where I think we immediately realized was like, oh, actually, we need to shift like almost like 80% of our portfolio to product market fit expansion, meaning we needed to find different bets in different directions to continue to grow, because we really felt like AI was going to disrupt our existing product market fit. And so no amount of feature or growth work was really going to like kind of keep the wheels spinning long term, or kind of get us to the next level of growth that we wanted to. So the key about product market fit expansion work is that you essentially have three choices. If you're doing that type of work, you have some form of existing asset of the company. So what you can choose is, actually, I'm going to keep my market the same, but I'm going to sell that market a new product. That's a little bit what we did at HubSpot. We kind of kept the market same, mid-market, all that kind of stuff. We started selling them other products, like the CRM, like the service desk, like all those types of things. The second choice is that you can take the same product or some iteration on your same product and sell it to a new market. So for us at Reforge, that might have been like, okay, going from product and growth professionals to engineering to marketing, all those types of things. And then the third category of stuff is, actually, you can try to do new product and new market at the same time. Really risky, really hard. This is like Amazon doing AWS, right? So like,
that's
totally
basically spinning up a whole new startup almost, because like new product,
Exactly.
new market, you have to find product market fit from scratch with basically some other kind of asset to leverage that is not your existing product and not your existing market, but the team, maybe?
Yeah. Maybe the team. Yeah. But I would actually say that work looks so different that you need a different DNA of people than the people that are really good at the other categories of work.
Which is maybe like a tick in the pros column for why buy versus build, like, or, like acquire versus do in-house. If you want that new DNA.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. Another good example of this is like all the moonshots that Google takes, right? Like, just almost none of them have anything to do with search. Very high risk, very expensive usually. And so there aren't a ton of examples of companies being very successful at that on a repeated basis, like Amazon and like Google have. It's very, so those were that was like, think about like, that was the option board for us. And so essentially the choices that we came down to was, okay, well, we could essentially reinvent education for our existing market. And because I fundamentally believe like education, where we're going to end up is you type in some kind of goal, a thing that you want to learn, you answer some questions so that it understands where you're at, also understands your interests, the things that you identify and are motivated and resonate with the most, and is just like generated dynamically on the fly. Audio, video, text, like all that stuff. I think that is the ending point for where AI is going to take us on the education side. And so we could have like done that play. But that would have required us to do two things at once: disrupt our own product and expand to other markets at the same time, in order to really kind of get to the size of company that we wanted to do. The second choice was like, okay, well, we could, really keep our market the same, product teams, really leverage that existing distribution and sell them additional products that we felt like were going to be relevant to them in this day and age, which kind of this is kind of the strategy that we ended up choosing. We ended up choosing the strategy for a couple of different reasons. One is that it felt way more aligned with the initial kind of spark of the business of helping teams operate on the frontier. It really filled like this gap that we talked about at the beginning of, between the learning and the execution. And it actually only required us to do one thing versus two things simultaneously, which was, okay, we had to develop these products, versus the other path felt like, actually, we have to build a whole new product and expand to new audiences all at the same time to make that meaningful. And so that's ultimately how we kind of thought through and got to the choice. There was, of course, other sets of ideas that we didn't maybe deeply consider as much, but that's essentially how we got to the strategic path. And then the question became, okay, what categories of products does our audience buy? Which ones do we want to go into? How do we execute against those things? And that gets more into like the execution part of the conversation.
And was the way you framed the bet, was it, hey, I'm gonna give ourselves a year to like crack one of these problem spaces and then see what happens, or how did you think about like measuring if that's the right strategy for you guys?
Yeah, so I think the founder over optimism and naiveness and like reality distortion field always leads us to thinking, oh, we could do this way fast. It's going to take way faster than it actually takes in practice. Is kind of really came down to. So yes, I kind of went into that, but the reality is that what it came down to is it actually took a year just to get us in the place to fully start executing on this. So just we had to go through a lot of tough changes. We had to go through some like huge layoffs. We pulled back a lot of the initiatives that we were focused on the learning side to like really focus on the core, the 80-20 of that business. So we pulled back some. Previously, we would go much wider with our course topics, and now we're really focused on, well, like, what is the 20% of topics that 80% of folks need? So we had to do, and then I had to think about like the DNA and talent needed to execute these bets. And so I think we really quickly got to a place where we need to hire or acquire that talent in. And so that acquisition path of we evaluated a bunch of categories, a bunch of teams, all that kind of stuff. That took start to finish, 6 months, maybe like a little bit more, to evaluate term sheets, due diligence, get those deals closed. So essentially that was like my 2024 was that whole year was basically doing all of that hard work to essentially reset us in a place that we would be able to actually start executing on it. And so like those deals, all that kind of stuff happened mid-December of 2024. January 2025, we launched our first software product. So just to give you a sense of how fast we tried to move on it.
Like when we look at like 5 products in 9 months, what that really means is if we zoom out, it's really kind of like 0 new products for like 12 months, followed by
that's right
5 products in 9 months, kind of like
there's all the pre-work. It is like the pre-work just to get the launch pad built or in a place to allow us to do those things. Yeah.
Almost like an organizational refactoring year is kind of what it
was 100%. 100% was. Yeah.
I'm curious, I know like HubSpot is very big on acquiring companies, but how do you done that? Have you done that before? Or is that also like a new muscle that you had to build in 2024 of like acquiring companies, due diligence?
HubSpot, well, they've done more acquisitions lately, but certainly while I was there and up to recent, it was not part of their muscle. When you compare it to other companies, if you want to take a look at companies who have really built this muscle, I think I always get them confused. Datadog versus one of the other data companies,
like Databricks.
Thank you. I can't remember which one, but one of them, maybe both of them, have done something like 30 plus acquisitions. Right?
Salesforce is notorious for their acquisition DNA. Yeah.
So HubSpot is not part of their core playbook. Inorganic growth is not part of their core playbook at all. They've done a few more recently. I'm not as close to the team that's doing them, so it's hard for me to like really commentate on that. So that was not a muscle that I had built before. I'd been on the other side of the table before as a founder, but never from the acquisition angle. And so we got some help from our investors. Like Insight Partners is one of our investors. Part of their fund is actually, they do a lot of like acquisitions, like PE type of stuff. So we got to learn from that pretty quickly. And honestly, at the end of the day, like there's a lot of mechanics, like deal terms you want to stay out of from that was the easy part. That all of that stuff was 100% the easy part. The hard part is really finding a needle in a haystack. So for us, our criteria was, okay, well, we want a small team, less than 10, but actually preferably like 6 or less. We want that team to be highly technical and just like highly technical, like oriented. We wanted them to have some traction, but not enough traction that it would like make the deal unbelievably expensive. And we want it to be a product that we feel like we can essentially rebrand and start selling through our pipeline versus having to go through a ton of integration, a ton of molding, right? So, and then there's just like the personalities and cultures that is kind of a layer that sat on top of that. So in the feedback analytics category, where our product Reforge insights, I looked at almost I would probably say like 85 to 90% of the companies that were operating in the space at that time. And Monterey, which was the one that we ended up acquiring, essentially was the only one that fit. And they actually said no to us initially. And so you can imagine I went through all of that process and I was like, we found it. We found that freaking needle in the haystack. It's like kind of new hope type of feeling. And then they said no to us out of the gate. Like that was just, it was crushing. It was absolutely crushing.
Do you remember why they were against it? Like I'm curious because, you know, obviously I talk a lot to people on the other side of the table, and it's like, hey, like company with a great reputation, like Reforge wants to buy you. Brian's going to let you do 0 to 1 product work, give you resources. You don't have to worry about fundraising anymore. You don't have to worry about blah, 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 all the things. What's the reason to say no in your view in that case?
They had another deal, and they had another deal, and this is where I can't really get into specifics because there's like a ton under like NDA and all that type of stuff. But when they told me that they were going with the other deal and they described the high level mechanics of it, in the back of my head, I was like, this is crushing, but there's still a chance that this other deal might not work out. And so I was like, in my head, I was like doing the calculations. I was like, I bet they're on a X term exclusivity period. I'm going to set reminders on my calendar, right? Like all the time. And so that the moment that I think that exclusivity period, and that's what happened. And it all ended up kind of coming together in the end. But yeah, it's a really tough process to find all the pieces that fit with the right situation. And we've gotten close on a lot of deals that check maybe like 4 out of those 5 boxes. But that last check, it was just like, just didn't quite work because of that.
Yeah, it's another thing that you didn't mention explicitly, but I'm sure it's an important part of this deal is that you have to convince the founders to stay in Reforge and get them excited to continue to build their product with them, because that feels like such a key part of the strategy, right? Like having these like hungry founders that are going to continue pushing the product forward. Like, what have you learned about convincing these founders to kind of stay on board and be excited to be building product inside of Reforge? And I'm sure there's some contractual clause that says they have to stay there, and there's some nice financial incentives. But I feel like a lot of these people also like they want to be excited for the work, basically.
Yeah. The financial incentives are part of it for sure, but I actually think there's 2 other things, which is one is you just have to make sure they're not burnt out. And that's number one, because if they're burnt out, there's no financial incentives or environment that you can put them in that they will sustain through or actually like deliver the value through.
If you're enjoying this conversation, please check out the links in the show notes to support the podcast. Marc and I do this out of love, but to keep it going, we also need your support. Thanks, and now back to the episode.
And the reality is, I would actually probably say that just knowing this, because I have a ton of founder friends who have done M&A. And so I kind of know the behind the scenes is a huge majority of those deals, the founder really is burnt out going into it, and they're just finding. And so from the acquirer side of things is like, that's part of the assessment is like, is the founder burnt out? And sometimes there's deals where it's like, okay, yes, they are, but the rest of the assets and the rest of the team are still good, but it's actually just better to acknowledge that up front and exit the founder give the founders a graceful exit, and rather than like some kind of muddy situation. But certainly part of our checklist of things was part of that talent and that energy, so it was important to us. So number one, if the founder's burnt out, there's no hope. The rest does not matter. And then I think the second,
Brian, would I be interrupting your train of thought if we double click on that for a sec?
Go for it. Yeah.
I think this is like a really interesting topic. I do advising work with founders, trying to help them, right? And I always try to understand where they're at. And sometimes I have like they're presenting the situation they're in one way, sounding excited, sounding really hungry, saying I'm not burned out at all. I'm really pumped for whatever the next thing is.
Yeah. They feel like
And
they have
then
the position. Yeah.
But you know, I'm not like, they're not trying to raise money from me. Most of the time, I don't really do investing. I'm just trying to help them. So, and yet sometimes I still have the sneaking suspicion that like you kind of look a little tired. Like you look like you might be a little burned out. So having not been in a position of trying to acquire someone and having them show up with their best energy to talk to me, but trying, like, even off the record, I struggle to sometimes assess whether they're burned out. So I'm curious, like, the question for you is, have you found any good ways to figure out if someone is burned out?
I think that it's honestly kind of what you're saying is you can kind of tell from, you can just pick up the signals of like how they look, how they feel, how they're talking about things. And, you know, are they hedging in their conversation? You know, all those, because there have been a couple deals where we've gotten close, like extremely close. We actually loved all of the things about it, except we were like, our spidey sense was like, something doesn't feel right here, like with the founder or founders, and they're not telling us something. And
just a spidey sense.
It is kind of like
it's like there's no evidence for it that you could like pinpoint on like a document or like an email or a text or anything. Like
the conversations aren't adding up, the reasons aren't adding up. Like there's like how they're talking about things, their motivations for wanting to do it. You know, the Monterey team was incredibly upfront with us. Like right from the get go, we were like, why are you even interested in potentially selling? And they're like, look, we think this category is going to be incredibly competitive. We think we have the best product, but not the best distribution. And we want to partner with somebody on that. And I was like, boom. It's like, okay, makes sense. Whereas others kind of come to the table with like these, like kind of, you can tell like crafted stories, right? That just don't really add up. And when you know, and then the real reason is typically like, oh, actually there's co-founder dispute, or they're burnt out and they don't want to work on this anymore, or they see something as part of the business that they feel like is a hurdle that they can't get over, and they try to hide all of those things. And I can tell you, sitting on the other side of the table, it immediately puts us into mode of like, okay, we think something is wrong here. They're not telling us. We either need to figure it out, and if we don't feel like we have it figured out, then it's an automatic no. And so it's actually, I think, better for people to come to the table with clarity on those things and say, hey, these are the good parts of the business. These are the parts of the business that are struggling. And so we're looking for a partner where this is like 1 + 1 = 3. And that's what the acquirer is trying to do on the other side of the table too. So you just have to shortcut the conversation, and rather than play these games to find the situation that works. And the same thing is, if you're burnt out, like that's fine. There's actually acquirers out there that are okay with that. You just have to find them. And if you try to play this game, I think these processes are drawn out. And the founders, the biggest problem is just like opportunity cost, because on the other side of the table, like you're trying to run a company at the same time. It's incredibly hard to run a company, keep the company growing, keep the team happy, like keep them moving forward when you're, going through all of these like other conversations at the same time. And so they're, and it's just the same thing. Time kills all deals too, as well. So, so it's,
so the burnout
go in with clarity.
Like the no burnout criteria almost seems like, in addition to the bringing new DNA into the team, and it sounds like it's an expansion of the assets that you could leverage. So to the point of wanting to take existing products to new products for the existing market, you're getting new products that you could put in front of the existing market. And in addition to getting new DNA into the team, and having these like little tiger teams that can really work fast together and already have chemistry together, you're also getting because they're not burned out, you're getting an infusion of entrepreneurial energy into the company's DNA that will hopefully cross-pollinate maybe with like other teams internally, right? Like
that definitely ends up being the challenge. I think one thing is in the best situations, I think whatever is grinding the founder down, right? Like let's use that as an example of like, oh, like they were building the best product in the space. They were a product machine. but distribution was coming incredibly tough to them. That can really grind a founder down. So if you can find a partner that takes that thing that's grinding you down off the plate, it's almost like liberating. It almost like unleashes them to a certain degree. That's, I think, the best scenario. But then on the other side of it, you have to deal with how do you bring the cultures together. And I think on that sense is you're always taking some risk there because you can never truly feel out culture and all that those types of things in a traditional process. I think the best thing that you can do is manage on the other side. One of my investors recommended this book. It's like Two Frogs on a Log or something like that. It's a business strategy book about these acquisitions, and it talks about this integration component really well. But I think the things that we learned best from this were two things. We're a remote company, but we brought the teams together right as they closed, right out of the gate. Of course, we did some work, but a lot of that was just like bringing the personalities together.
Do you mean in person?
What's that? Yeah. Oh, yeah. In person.
You said we're remote, but you brought the teams together in person?
Yeah. For a time, for a week or two. And then the second thing I think that's really important is you get the new team is just momentum. So that's why we launched Insights so quickly in January, because that does two things. One, it provides the team that's coming in like confidence and things to build on and move towards. And to anybody else in the company, they always have the eye of like, who are these newcomers, right? Are they gonna and it's kind of those proof points, those value points. So you have to get them shipping unbelievably, or whatever the metric is, like unbelievably quickly. Those are the two big lever points.
Yeah, and the cool third one too is that now also you're giving confidence to the Monterey team that it was the right decision to partner together, because all of a sudden they get all this distribution right away too, which is awesome.
Yeah, exactly.
And it sounds like the way you've been approaching this is you have a space that you have an intuition that is worth entering, and then you start looking for companies that are building in that space. Is that more or less correct? Or is it a little bit more like you have a few spaces and then you look for teams in all those spaces, and then if there's like a perfect alignment on those two things, then you go for it?
That's been 90% of it. We had one category come to us that we weren't really looking at before. And we were just generally surprised that we hadn't necessarily uncovered it as a category or product that our audience was really adopting, or that it had other elements. We were looking for like things with PLG motions at that time, all that type of stuff. And it's never perfect. Like I think when I was originally doing this in 2024, for example, the models weren't good enough for, to do like all of the AI prototyping. And because those didn't really come out till late 2024. People forget that, like those are less than a year old, right? Like, which is crazy. And so in hindsight, I missed that one. I missed that category as like one that may emerge and one that we may go after. And so we ended up after it really emerging in early 2025, looking at a bunch of companies, but didn't quite work out. And then we quickly decided, okay, we're going to build. This is such an important category that we're just going to go build it. And then we built Build, which is the whole Reforge Build, which is our prototyping product. And so I would still say like we're playing a tiny bit of catch up there, but by January of 2026, we'll be exceeding most of our direct competitors on that. I'm pretty confident of that.
It sounds like each of those spaces, like Mark, you asked about the spaces. It's kind of like the way I was kind of originally hearing the story. Brian, let me know if this is fair, is like you almost look at the different stages of the product life cycle, and you ask, and because that your current audience that you can get distribution to are people who are generally operating somewhere across that product life cycle. And you basically identified key problems, maybe areas that your audience is underserved, maybe or exciting, just like growing TAM opportunities where there's a lot of budgets to spend and grow across that life cycle, and made a build versus buy decision on how you're going to place your bets on each of those areas. And so if that's all correct, my question is, I think there's a lot of founder CEOs who would take a bit of a monolithic bet approach to this, which is let's treat all of those different areas as maybe parts of a product. but let's start working on a large product that will span that entire lifespan together. And your approach seems to have been more like, let's spin up individual product bets, and then we'll kill the ones that don't work. And then the ones that do work, we're going to figure out a path to weaving them together into a holistic product almost after the fact. Like, we need to earn the right to build that monolithic product. Is that fair? Am I off on like how you think about it?
We should talk about the strategy of that. So I guess first we started in two places. One was I just asked our customer base, like, take me through your tech stack. And then I asked them, okay, which ones were you the direct buyer for? Which ones were you like an influence in that buying decision? Like all those things, because the things that they use don't necessarily mean the things that they are where they're the buyer. So that was kind of number one. And then number two is I did my best at canvassing. So out of those things, that I wasn't looking for necessarily the tools. I was looking for the problems that they were solving with those tools, because those problems kind of inform the category. And the question was, okay, do we think that's a problem in a category that AI is going to bring something totally new to? And so those were the categories that we kind of went after. There were some other factors of looking at, like, certainly like competition and those other things. But to the second part of your question, yeah, I knew pretty early on that I wanted to pursue a multi-product strategy out of the gate. There are trade-offs to every strategy. And the key is, like, the actual hard part about strategy is naming those trade-offs and acknowledging with the team what are the hard things that you are going to all decide to take on as a team. Because there's hard things with every strategy, right? In the multi-product strategy, the pros are that you've got more entry points into the customer. You have more opportunities to expand that customer from those entry points. And it also tends to lead to stickier retention when you have, like, people on 2+ products in a portfolio. Those are all of the advantages. Now, the cons are that having a portfolio of 4 products from a go-to-market perspective of how you tell that messaging, how you spin up all of those go-to-market motions, especially when each product has somewhat of the same buyer, but slightly different buying processes and adoption processes. Like, you're taking on a lot of complication. That's the hard thing. That's one of the hard things that you're taking. Also, you're taking on the hard thing of how do you execute on multiple products in parallel, right? Which is also a pretty hard thing. The flip side, what you're talking about, single product, point solution, all that type of stuff, is totally different set of things. Pretty much the opposite. From a product perspective, the product team is focused on executing on one product. From the go-to-market, you're telling one story about one product with one buying motion, right? And that's easy. But all of the cons are exactly the opposite of what I was just talking about. You have one entry point into the customer. There really, a lot of times, isn't ways to expand until you layer on a bunch of other products or expansion opportunity, like all of these different types of things. And so I think for us, and the thing that I keep reminding my team about, because when you start executing a strategy you don't get to the hard stuff until you get like a third of the way through the strategy. And when you hit that point, you always get to the grass is greener situation, which is like, oh, maybe we should just be a single product. Or if I'm a single, maybe we should go multi-product. And you all of a sudden start forgetting all of this stuff. And it's like, no, like, this is the hard part of the strategy. Let's just like name it and like execute through it. Now, the question is maybe one of your foundational underlying assumptions changes. And that's, I think, when you try to reconsider changing strategies. But just because like something is starting to feel hard and tough is not a reason to change strategy.
That seems like it's going to be necessary for anything to be successful. It's got to hit that hard point. Otherwise, no one plays easy mode forever. Yeah.
No, 100%.
Is one of the hard things about this strategy too, like knowing when to kill a bet? Is that something that's you think it's going to get harder over time? And how do you think about making that decision?
Yeah, I think, well, it's hard to always kill anything, right? Like that's a big.
We would like to think so. Yeah.
Yes, it's very difficult just because of the time, the effort, and then you always get in the mode of like, maybe it just needs like this one more feature or something like that. And so for us, I think the major signal for us to kill, so it was a product called Compass that we ended up, kill is probably too strong of a word. What we did is we took a lot of that functionality and merged it into our other products. Because the signal that we were finding was that the Venn diagrams of the directions that we wanted to lead in the problem spaces that we wanted those products to solve ended up starting to really feel like they were overlapping. And that would be very confusing to the customers, like from the go-to-market motion, all of those types of pieces. And so we basically took a lot of the things that we built in that product and worked some of them into our insights product, some of them into our other products, because once again, a big part of this strategy that we're talking to move fast is like you have to have discrete problem areas for the teams to execute, feel very autonomous, a lot of ownership over, and to execute very quickly on. And when those Venn diagrams start to overlap, that's where you start to get the, wait, are they building this? Or are we building this?
Tightly aligned, loosely coupled is how this is generally talked about, right? You don't want the teams to be tightly coupled, because if there's too many dependencies, they start to get into each other's way.
Yeah.
So Compass, did Compass like get into the swimming lane of multiple of the other bets?
Yeah, it got mostly into the swimming lane of insights. So with Compass, what we were trying to do was move as far upstream the product development process as possible and capture content. And so it was like a combination of this like meeting recorder, capturing all of that context, and then taking all of that context and automating a bunch of downstream actions that a product team might do, whether it's like, the simple example is like, generating a Jira ticket or something like that. That's kind of like where that product lived. But what we were finding is like, just like with the insights product, it was kind of a lot of the same things. It was just we were capturing a different type of context, which was the customer feedback. So like just a lot of the features, a lot of the problem space that we were trying to do started to overlap a lot. And as a result, we just decided to make a hard choice and spin one down and absorb it in a different area.
One thing that I've noticed is that it sounds like a big philosophy of yours for just building in the age of AI is less about building the things that almost like accelerate like workflows that existed in the past, and more of like thinking, hey, how can we maybe do this thing that's important or solve this problem in a net new way that before wasn't possible? And it sounds like that's something that you're looking for when you're acquiring companies, when you're building products. It also sounds like that's also what you're pushing your teams to think about when they think about, hey, here's how I get work done, here's how I build products. So I'm maybe curious, like how have you
can I share encourage your team on this that I'm like still working out in my head? Is that acceptable here?
Yeah.
All right,
that would be super helpful.
Yeah, so I think to this point right now that this is what I'm seeing. Like I talk to a lot of our customers. I'm just like, walk me through all the tools and the process that you're using. And what I typically find is some version of this, which I'm calling like the AI Frankenstein. So what ends up happening is, and so for those that are just listening, I've got this visual of like from start to finish, a product development lifecycle. And when I typically walk through this with our customers, here's what I'm hearing, right? There's like, oh yeah, we've got our customer feedback spread across, 4 of these like pre-AI SaaS tools, like our support and our user research and stuff. I've got some quant data in, a product analytics tool. I've got some market data and some Notion, like all that kind of stuff. Or our vision and strategy is in Google Docs, like all that type of stuff. And then it kind of goes into, it's like, oh yeah, I'm doing a bunch of copying and pasting and stuff into ChatGPT, Claude. I might be kind of refining some requirements and stuff. And then I'm taking that ChatGPT Claude output and I'm like copying and pasting it into a Notion and Confluence doc. And then I'm taking that and I'm copying and pasting it into a prototype tool. And then I'm taking that prototype and I'm re-embedding that link back into Notion and stuff and into Slack and getting commentary there. And then I'm like taking that and going, right, you get the whole point. It's this weird handoff. It's these weird handoffs between old tools, new AI tools, and humans. And so we've just basically, we've inserted like this third thing into this fragmentation that has made, I think, actually the fragmentation even worse. And so The problem with this is that there's just like loss at every step of a handoff. You have got different context and different tools. And I think the early adopters, probably a lot of the people who are listening to this, will do this. But I will say like late adopters, the majority of the markets in any kind of workflow you're dealing with will not do this. Like they won't deal with this friction. They're not going to train on the new habits just to get like a little bit of a incremental improvement at a single step of the process.
So are you describing this? Is the process that we're looking at that you just described? I'm trying to figure out if that's kind of when we call it the AI Frankenstein. Are we saying like this is a broken process, or is this kind of like the new way that's emerging as like how AI native teams are working from what you're seeing, or is it like neither? It's something.
I'm saying like
yeah,
this is we are in a messy step towards what quote unquote AI native will look like. I'm saying this is a problem. This is definitely a problem.
Yeah, this feels like a transitionary state. Yeah, I'm curious what those host of reasons are. Yeah.
100%, right? This stems from once again saying, I'm going to take this little part of the process and try to automate it, get AI to do exactly how I did it before versus kind of zooming out a little bit as well. You also see this, there's this whole narrative of like PM is the new bottleneck. Have you all seen that on like LinkedIn and stuff? Yeah, I'm seeing some nodding heads.
Yep.
This is just a symptom of the same thing, where a lot of teams, what they've done is they prioritized adopting AI among engineering. They're like, we need our developers to write code faster, which makes sense historically. Like that was the constraint. There's more heads there. It's one of the larger expense areas. But product teams, the output that we are optimizing for is not more lines of code. The thing that we need to optimize for is shipping features, product value that our customers adopt. Those two things have to be true together. And so if that's the output, that's actually a broader workflow and system between PM design and engineering. So if you hyper focus on just one part of the system, you just move the bottleneck to another part of the system, and you essentially get the same exact result that you were getting before. And I think that's where we're at in this transitionary state. Is like a lot of teams have chosen hyper specific points to improve and efficient, but the holistic output maybe not be improving so far. And so I think as we think about our tools and what AI native might look like, I think that's still very much evolving. But of course, I think for especially the more early parts of the product development process, this isn't mind-blowing, but we think the artifact that it centers around is certainly the prototype. Now, is the prototype, but the prototype is just an artifact. There are steps to the workflow before, there's steps during it, and there's steps after it. And
it's also not one thing. The prototype is an evolving series of data points at moments in time.
Yeah. So if that's happening across a dozen plus tools, then I think we're going to get incremental gains. And I think that's ultimately where we want to go with our suite, and specifically our prototyping product, is how do we collapse as much as we possibly can into one cohesive experience that works together. But I think that's going to evolve. I think that's evolved quite a bit. For example, I actually think like insights, all these like feedback analytics tools right now, they're very much I think they're going to start to blend into the background versus those being tools that we are using on a daily basis. I think that data and the AI is going to get so good at analyzing a lot of that stuff that output of that is just going to feed other things that we interact with more on a daily basis versus being something like we go to on a daily basis. But once again, we're in this transitionary point right now in the market, and like all of these pieces.
Yeah. This is Ben reminding me of the conversation we had with James, who's a friend, also Supra member, who ex-product leader at Stripe, YouTube, and then he did a 3-month internship at Code, which is basically a Cursor competitor. And I really like the way he described like the AI adoption ladder. He said it wasn't like, it's not whether you're AI native or not. There's basically like 3 levels to AI adoption. One that's like adoption at the individual level. And I think that's a lot of what you're seeing. It's like, okay, like, we see designers maybe adopting like prototyping tools, or PMs, like, writing PRDs with Claude. And then the next level is like AI adoption at the team level. And when you start at the team level, you start to change a little bit like the workflows or the processes or the rituals of that team, right? So maybe instead of having Figma in your design critiques, you have a prototype, and maybe PMs are there too, because they are the ones that kind of kick that off. And then the ultimate level is like the, org level adoption, right? And that's where maybe everyone is working in the same environment, and, everyone's working out of the code base, and all the documentation is there, and there's not really that many handoffs because everything is happening in code, maybe. And maybe there's some docs for really complex stuff. Maybe there's somewhere where the, there's the customer interviews are in some sort of folder in the repository. But I think the level 3, how that looks like, still very unclear.
I think it's very unclear.
Yeah.
The very fuzzy picture in my head right now is that obviously the thing that AI is enabled is connecting like natural language words to more complex outputs like code and design and stuff. And right now, the natural language words, the design and the code all are completely separated with very little linkage. And so you change, right? Like we change a little bit of word in Notion or wherever we're doing it. And then we're like trying to copy and paste it to get it to generate the design, and then try to get the design to generate the code, right? Like all those types of things. I think in a perfect world, like those things would 3 be like kind of linked together, so that if I change the code, it's changing the design and the words that are being used to explain, or vice versa. Now, I don't know how we get there. Like, I think that's where we're still figuring it out, but that's my very, very fuzzy picture of it. The team adoption thing is interesting. I think we individuals and companies all feel like we're on a hamster wheel. And that what that hamster wheel feels like is I'm trying to adopt AI tools. And, but then like the pace of new things that are coming out, I'm just like keeps adding to my backlog of things that I want to try and adopt, which leads me to only adopting something surface level because I don't have enough time to go deep on it like that frequently. And then that flywheel kind of like keeps on spinning. And so the question I think is, how do you individually and as a team get off of that hamster wheel? And I think individually, something that I'm doing is, rather than trying to solve this in my day-to-day, something I'm doing in January is organizing a group of like myself and 6 of my friends. We're going to go to an Airbnb for a long weekend, 3.5 days. We each have our own individual things we want to go deep on. We're going to go deep on those in the morning and the early afternoon solo. And then we're going to like do show and tells over dinner of like what we did, and like carve out meaningful space in the right environment to try things, take risks, go deep on it, be okay if like you try it and it's like complete crap. Very hard to do in your day-to-day motion when I'm like opening up my Notion, I've got 10 to-do items and I'm just like, man, I just need the fastest way to get those things done. And I don't want to take the risks of trying this in a totally new way and having it failing and having to start from scratch. I think there's team level versions of that too that I'm seeing among the best teams, which is your core machine, your core product team, your core marketing team, whatever it is. I think you should be having that team in their day-to-day try to adopt and do things with AI and stuff like that. But I think in parallel, you also probably have to create a team and a set of things that sets up an environment to try things in a totally new way, complete new risks, completely new sets of tools, like all of those types of things. Because if you don't set up that parallel track, you will never take the risks in the core team. You're just like, I don't want to mess up the code or like the work, like all of the things that you've probably spent a bunch of time setting up. And once you figure out things in that second team, then you can figure out how to integrate them. But I think if teams only stick to the first, which is like, hey, each of you individuals, like you need to figure out your day-to-day, you know, how to do it's just the adoption is just going to remain surface level. You'll never get to the point of saying, okay, how do I do this thing totally differently in a totally different way? So that's how I'm personally thinking about solving it. But to get to that level 2, level level 3, and then of course, if you're just starting from scratch with like 2 people, then that's a totally different scenario. And I have friends doing that too, operating in completely different ways, but they're not dealing with the same constraints of an existing team, an existing product, existing customer set that you have to keep happy, all those things.
Yeah, I think this is anecdotal, but I think there's like 3 examples of not massive companies, like maybe like Series B, Series C companies that I've noticed like a really big shift in the way they work. And one thing that they all have in common is they did a hackathon at the ELT level leadership. Like all the leadership level went on for like, I think it was like 3 days. They did an on-site and they all hacked together, like random shit. So some of it was like net new products. Some of it was like internal tools. And I think that got them, everyone, I think, more comfortable with the tools. And then I think they got them, I think, the energy or the confidence to be, hey, I can go back into my team, maybe encourage to do the same, and maybe also like, start adopting some tools on a day-to-day basis. So I think there's definitely something there of just experimenting in a safe space where the stakes are lower.
It's just creating the environment that has the right people, the right constraints, the right being able to take the right set of risks and incentives. Yeah, that's right. The right goal. Yeah, that's like 100%. Because if you don't set up that, and I'm sure there's multiple ways of doing that, but if you don't set up that container, I don't think I think you'll remain like kind of surface level in this adoption.
Connection that I'm making now, Brian, is that the really cool kind of position that Reforge is in right now is that, you're originally an education company that now is selling software too. But I feel like big part of like the go-to-market motion for these products is educating a lot of the companies on how to work together, how this new world would look like. So I think in that way, you guys are very uniquely positioned of like using that old muscle that you also have to help people with that transition, which is really unique.
Yeah, it is. But it's a very hard transformation too. I think what we find in a lot of companies is can be a lot of eagerness on the frontline employee. There's a disconnect between where leadership thinks the company is at and what's actually happening on the front lines. And so it has to happen both in parallel if you want transformation. Otherwise, the individuals that are most eager, most adopting this stuff, they'll find themselves new environments to operate in.
Yeah. Maybe one last. I know we're close to wrapping up.
I also have one more I want to squeeze in, Mark. But yeah, go. Maybe we'll do a lightning round. Yeah.
So I know you talked a lot about the distribution shift, basically like ChatGPT apps. What does that mean? I'm curious how like maybe like super quick, like how are you thinking about like maybe using that distribution channel for Reforge for your products?
Yeah. So we're still in like the inception phase. We've been playing around with it. And I've been talking to a bunch of other people who are playing around with it to kind of see what they're trying and stuff. The problem is it's still pretty closed, right? And they're very much optimizing for consumer companies as well. And we're kind of in the middle, right? We're kind of in the middle on that. And so it's one of those, I think actually the most important thing for most people to do right now is just understand how their customers what they're doing in those environments. So like one of the things I pay close attention to is like, what are our customers doing in ChatGPT? And then what are they trying to take out of ChatGPT and put in other places? Also the reverse direction. What are they taking from other places and putting into ChatGPT? And what that does is it gives me a pretty good signal of, okay, what are the problems that they're trying to solve? Where might there be friction? How might we kind of connect those dots in a more seamless experience if we were to enable like a full application? So that's number one that I think that's the main thing that I'm focused on until there's a little bit more openness among beyond these preferred partnerships. The second thing that I've been paying attention to is just the value exchange between the application and ChatGPT and the platform. And so what are they enabling, giving you access to in terms of data, discoverability, those types of things? Because those are like inputs into what type of experience. The biggest mistake of every previous shift is that the people who had products before try to copy and paste them into the new environment and channels. This happened in gaming, like all the web casual games, tried to copy and paste it into the Facebook environment. None of them won. It was all the new players that built from the ground up, knowing those inputs. also happen on mobile. Like a lot of web apps try to like basically copy and paste themselves into the mobile environment, like all those types of things. And so that I think is the tendency of folks, and you've got to steer away. You got to steer away from that. And that just starts with understanding how are your customers like behaving differently in these channels and what things do you have access to. The combination of those two things will equal a new experience.
Yeah, thanks for that. I have my last question for you, and then we'll finish. As you think about these new products, I'm like a 0 to 1 product guy historically, mostly. What's the number one thing that you look at with one of your new products that you're testing that gets you to feel like it's got a real pull right now? Is there anything that comes to mind as like the strongest indicator of a market pull or success with one of these new products?
Beyond the normal of like just like looking at usage and other things, so the priority stacks, I think, of teams and customers, I finding is changing quarter to quarter of like what problems. And that's partially because AI kind of enables newer and newer things. And therefore, that priority stack is potentially changing. So certainly like prototyping right now is probably top or near the priority stack of most of our type of customers. That was not the case early in the year. I can tell you that much. This also kind of depends on the adoption motion. Like our Insights product, problem story resonated day one, but that is a much harder product to get set up. We're connecting to a bunch of data systems and there's still fear around data, data and all what you're doing with the data, like all of that type of stuff. So that's one that has a much more lagging. The leading indicator, does the problem resonate enough to motivate people to the next phase of the process of like, okay, this is something I want to go through that pain
eagerness
for.
to move forward with you. Like something like eagerness or urgency or something like that.
And so the adoption, all that kind of stuff is like the lagging indicator, whereas prototyping, it's actually the first indicator you're looking at because of low friction. So I think this gets down to whatever the adoption motion is. And then I would always say like, the early stage companies and what they're doing is always the canary in the coal mine of what you think everybody else will be doing later. And so how to stay in touch with that is something that I'm trying to spend more time on because our audience has shifted to a lot later stage companies. But thankfully, many of my friends are founders and I get to see what crazy things they're trying. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you for taking the time to chat. I know we're at time, so we want to let you go. And just in closing, two final questions for you is one, where can our audience learn more about what you're thinking about these days? And two, how can they potentially be helpful to you?
Yeah, I did move to Substack. You can just go to brianbalfour.com, and I'm not posting regularly, but only when I feel like something is really important, like the great distribution shift. That would be number one. And number two is I'm publishing a lot on LinkedIn. That's probably my primary channel. And I always encourage people, you can DM me on LinkedIn and in other places. I'm always happy to answer questions.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. This was an awesome conversation.
And thanks, congrats on all the progress and the big shift.
Yeah, sorry to run so fast, but I'll let me know if anything comes up afterwards and we'll take it from there.